The rain fell in steady sheets, hammering against the windshield of Officer Garrett's patrol car as he pulled up to the curb of the old house on Millbrook Street. His partner, Officer Lena Rivera, sat beside him, squinting through the fogged glass at the dilapidated building. The house had stood abandoned for years, its once pristine white paint now peeling away like dead skin, the windows dark and gaping like the hollow eyes of a skull. Dispatch had received a call about loud noises, maybe screams, coming from inside. The neighbor, a jittery old woman, had been reluctant to give too many details, but her voice had trembled with fear. "I know what I heard," she had insisted. "It sounded like someone was in trouble. Maybe more than one person." Garrett didn't like the look of the place. There was something wrong about it, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He hadn't believed in that kind of thing before, bad feelings, gut instincts, but there was no shaking it now. The house seemed to watch them as they sat in the car, like it was waiting for them to make the first move. "You getting the creeps too?" Rivera asked, her voice low, almost like she didn't want the house to hear them. "Yeah," Garrett muttered, shaking his head. "Feels off." He grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, the beam slicing through the rain as he stepped out of the car. The old iron gate creaked as they pushed through, the path to the front door overgrown with weeds and vines that seemed to grab at their ankles. Rivera was already on edge, her hand resting on her holstered gun. Garrett felt the weight of his own, comforting but heavy. As they approached the porch, Garrett noticed something strange. There were footprints in the mud leading to the front door, fresh ones. They were too big for a child but too small for a grown man, like someone caught between. The house had been abandoned for years. No one should have been in there. The wooden steps groaned under their weight, the sound echoing through the stillness of the night. Garrett glanced at the windows, still dark. No lights, no movement. But the air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. "Let's check it out," Rivera said, her voice steadier than Garrett felt. She knocked on the door hard enough for anyone inside to hear, but there was no response. "Police," she called out, but again only silence greeted them. Garrett's hand hesitated on the doorknob. It was unlocked. "Who the hell leaves their door unlocked in a place like this?" Rivera muttered. She didn't wait for an answer. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway that stretched into the darkness. The smell hit them first, a damp, musty odor like rotting wood mixed with something else. Something metallic. Something Garrett recognized all too well. "Blood." "Jesus," Rivera muttered, wrinkling her nose. She flashed her light around, revealing peeling wallpaper, a cracked floor, and furniture covered in sheets as if the house had been frozen in time. There was a chill in the air that didn't belong, something colder than the rain outside. Garrett moved forward cautiously, his boots echoing on the hardwood. "Let's check the main rooms first," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't know why he was whispering. There was no one here. There shouldn't be anyone here. The first room they entered was the living room. It looked as if it had been abandoned mid-conversation. A sofa, sagging and worn, sat in front of a fireplace that hadn't seen a fire in years. But something was wrong with the fireplace. Garrett's flashlight revealed scratch marks on the stone, like something had tried to claw its way out. His pulse quickened. Rivera moved ahead of him, her light sweeping the room. She paused, her beam catching something on the wall. "Hey Garrett, look at this." Garrett stepped closer, his stomach turning as he saw it. Words, scrawled in what looked like dark red paint, or was it something worse? Covered the walls, looping and spiraling in strange symbols and phrases he didn't understand. They repeated over and over, etched into the very wood beneath the plaster. "It waits below. Don't let it out." She never left. Garrett's skin crawled. What the hell is this? Rivera's eyes were wide, her breath coming faster. "We need to call for backup. Something's seriously messed up here." Garrett nodded, his hand already moving to the radio, but the static that greeted him made his heart sink. "No signal. We're too far out," Rivera said, her voice tight. "House must be blocking it." They shared a look, both of them knowing that they should leave, that every instinct was telling them to turn around, get in the car, and drive far away. But the call. The screams. Someone might still be here. They couldn't just walk away. "Let's keep going," Garrett said, though every part of him screamed against it. They moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing in the unnerving silence. The kitchen was next. It was old, outdated, with rusted appliances and broken tiles littering the floor. The smell was stronger here, the metallic tang of blood mingling with something worse, something foul like decaying meat. Rivera flashed her light over the counter and froze. "Garrett, look." He followed her gaze, his stomach lurching. On the counter, an old butcher knife lay covered in what could only be fresh blood. The droplets led away from the counter, A thin trail that disappeared down the hallway toward the basement door. Shit, Garrett muttered, swallowing hard. Whoever was here, they went downstairs. They approached the door cautiously. It was slightly ajar, just enough for a shadow to slip through. The trail of blood continued down the old, rotting stairs. Garrett couldn't see the bottom. His flashlight didn't reach far enough. "I don't like this," Rivera whispered, her hand tightening around the grip of her gun. "Neither do I," Garrett admitted. He didn't want to go down there. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to turn around, but they had a job to do. They had to check. The house seemed to hold its breath as they stood at the top of the stairs, listening. The rain outside had stopped, and the world had fallen deathly silent. A creak echoed from below. Rivera's breath hitched. Garrett clenched his jaw. Something moved in the basement. Another creak, followed by a slow, deliberate scraping noise, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Garrett's heart pounded in his ears. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his boot landing on the first stair. It groaned under his weight, and for a moment he thought it would collapse. Rivera followed behind him, the tension thick enough to choke on. They descended slowly, each step feeling like it could be their last. The walls were closing in, the narrow staircase forcing them into the darkness below. The smell was overwhelming now, like death itself had made a home down here. As they reached the bottom, Garrett's flashlight flickered, casting long, twisted shadows across the stone floor. The basement was wide and empty, except for a few scattered boxes and an old workbench. But something was wrong. There were too many shadows, shapes that didn't belong. Garrett swung his light around and stopped cold. In the far corner, something was moving. The basement was unnaturally cold, colder than it had any right to be. The smell of blood and decay hung thick in the air, making it almost impossible for Garrett and Rivera to breathe as they stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. Garrett's flashlight flickered again, the weak beam struggling to pierce the suffocating darkness around them. There was movement in the far corner, something shifting behind the old workbench, slow and deliberate. Garrett's grip tightened around his gun, every instinct screaming at him to back away, to run up those stairs and never look back. But his feet wouldn't move. His body was locked in place as if the air itself had turned to ice, trapping him where he stood. Rivera moved beside him, her breath quickening, her eyes wide with fear. She was pointing her flashlight toward the corner, but the beam couldn't quite catch whatever was lurking just out of sight. "Do you see that?" Rivera whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening silence. Garrett didn't respond. He couldn't. His heart was pounding in his chest, so loud it drowned out his thoughts. Slowly he took a step forward, his flashlight sweeping across the floor. The thin trail of blood led right to the corner, pooling at the base of something metal. His light caught the edge of it, a large rusted iron cage. "What the hell is that?" Rivera muttered, stepping closer to get a better look. Garrett could barely make out the shape. It was an old cage forged from thick iron bars, its surface slick with rust and something else, something darker. The bars twisted and coiled, almost like the gnarled branches of a tree, curving upward toward the ceiling in a grotesque, unnatural design. But the cage wasn't empty. In the far corner, crouched low to the ground, was something. Garrett's light barely grazed it, but what he saw sent a jolt of terror through his entire body. It was a shape, a human-like figure, but its limbs were all wrong. Too long, too thin, twisted and broken like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Its head lolled to one side, half hidden in the shadows. Rivera gasped, taking a step back. "What the fuck is that?" Before Garrett could respond, the figure moved. A low, guttural growl filled the room, vibrating through the stone floor beneath their feet. The figure twitched, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it began to stand, rising slowly from its crouched position. Garrett's flashlight flickered again, casting erratic shadows on the walls, making it impossible to tell what was real and what was just a trick of the light. "Back up," Garrett whispered urgently, grabbing Rivera's arm. "We need to get out of here, now." But as they turned toward the stairs, something happened. The floor beneath them shifted. It was subtle at first, just a faint tremor, but then the ground groaned, the stone creaking as if it were alive, as if something beneath the surface was waking up. Garrett felt the vibration in his bones, deep and unsettling, like the earth itself was about to open up and swallow them whole. Without warning, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Garrett and Rivera both whipped around, their flashlights darting to the top of the stairs, but the door was already sealed, the faint glow from upstairs extinguished in an instant. They were plunged into darkness. "What the hell is going on?" Rivera's voice trembled, her fear finally breaking through the facade of calm she had been holding onto. Garrett's flashlight flickered again, and that's when he saw it, The iron cage, the twisted, rusted bars, they were moving. Slowly they began to rise from the floor, unfurling like some grotesque flower blooming in reverse. The bars creaked and groaned as they lifted higher, forming an arch above them. Garrett watched in horror as the iron slowly bent and curled, the bars weaving together like the tendrils of a living thing. "No," he whispered, backing up against Rivera. "No, no, no, this isn't happening." But it was happening. The cage was closing in around them, the bars stretching out like the claws of some unseen predator, surrounding them on all sides. Garrett lunged forward, grabbing the bars, but the moment his hands touched the metal, he recoiled in pain. The iron was searing hot, burning his skin even through his gloves. Rivera tried to push her way through the bars, but it was too late. The iron had already formed a perfect circle around them, trapping them in the center of the basement. They were caged, like animals in a twisted menagerie. The figure in the corner moved again, this time stepping fully into the light. Garrett's heart stopped. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Its face, if you could call it that, was a distorted, grotesque mockery of a human face. Its skin hung loose and rotted, its eyes black pits of nothingness, and its mouth was stretched wide into a jagged grin, teeth too sharp, too long, too hungry. The thing spoke. "You shouldn't have come here," it rasped, its voice like broken glass scraping against stone. "You're mine now." Garrett's mind raced, his hands shaking as he tried to think of a way out, any way out. But the bars were too thick, too strong. Even if they weren't burning hot, there was no way to bend them, no way to slip through the narrow gaps. They were trapped. Rivera's breathing had become shallow, panicked. She pressed herself against the bars, desperately searching for a weakness, for some escape. "There's gotta be a way out," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There's gotta be a way out of here." But Garrett knew the truth. There was no way out. The creature took another step forward, its bony hands reaching out, the fingers long and skeletal, tipped with jagged nails. It moved with a horrible grace, each step deliberate, slow, as if savoring the moment. "We need to do something," Rivera hissed, her voice thick with fear. "We can't just stand here." But Garrett didn't have an answer. His mind was blank, his body numb with terror. All he could do was stare at the creature as it closed the distance between them, its grin widening, its eyes locked onto his. And then, in a horrifying flash, the cage shifted again. The iron bars that had once surrounded them like a dome now bent inward, folding in on themselves, twisting like vines. Garrett could feel the air growing tighter, the space between the bars shrinking. The cage wasn't just trapping them, it was closing in. "We're not going to make it," Garrett whispered, more to himself than to Rivera. "We're not getting out of this." Rivera's eyes were wide, her face pale. "Don't say that," she breathed. "We'll find a way out, we have to." But Garrett couldn't see how. The iron bars were tightening, the space around them growing smaller by the second. Soon there wouldn't be enough room to breathe. The creature watched them with dark amusement, its head tilting as the bars pressed closer, trapping them like insects in a web. "We're going to die here," Garrett thought, the realization settling over him like a cold, wet blanket. Rivera let out a choked sob, her hands still clawing at the bars as if there was a chance, any chance, that they could escape. But it was useless. The cage had claimed them. The creature grinned wider, its voice slithering through the dark. "No one will find you." The bars pressed in closer, and Garrett closed his eyes, knowing that the nightmare had only just begun.